Hello there, my name's James Kelly and welcome back to Scot Goes Pop. And the extraordinary news is that it looks like the UK will recognise the State of Palestine in September. It's almost hard to take in just the supreme irony of the fact that the people in the Labour Party who are responsible for the confected anti-Semitism crisis, basically the plot to dislodge Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, that they have been forced themselves into being the government that takes what Israel regards as the ultimate hostile act of recognising the State of Palestine. And make no mistake, they have been forced into it. It's been because of I think it caught the imagination of Emmanuel Macron that he could recognise the State of Palestine on behalf of France. And once that happened, it would become very difficult for the UK government not to follow suit, particularly when there's so much pressure on them from within the Parliamentary Labour Party. Of course, Keir Starmer has added these strange conditions to his planned recognition of the State of Palestine. He'll only do it if Israel fail to take certain steps. And that is very offensive, the idea that sovereignty for one country is a punishment for its neighbour's wrongdoing. But nevertheless, what matters is what he means by introducing those conditions. Does he mean that he wants a get-out clause to prevent him actually going through with the recognition of the State of Palestine, or is there something else going on? And I think there is something else going on, because we heard that apparently he promised the Labour MPs that he would make the recognition of Palestine unconditional. David Lammy made a speech at the UN which very much made it sound like it was unconditional. So it sounds more like these conditions were added at the last minute, in a sort of state of panic about how this would tarnish his reputation as a fighter against anti-Semitism and so on. But that means, presumably, that it's just sort of window dressing and that they do actually intend to go through with the recognition, and that will change everything. It's not just a symbolic step, as some people say. It's not just a meaningless step. It's not like, some people say that you can't recognise something that doesn't exist. There is no Palestinian state, so how can you recognise it? But obviously, we can think of loads of historical precedents where a government was not in control of a particular state. The governments in exile during World War II of the Netherlands or of Belgium or of France, and yet those were recognised. They had widespread international recognition as the legitimate governments of sovereign states, and that will put the State of Palestine in the same sort of category, or even a slightly superior category to that, because there is a Palestinian administration that does have limited powers within parts of the Palestinian territories. They are located, that administration is actually located within the West Bank. They're not in exile in any way, and so they do have some limited sovereignty. So it's not like it's a work of fiction that there is this entity called the State of Palestine. It is actually there to some extent. And once you recognise the State of Palestine, the whole meaning of working towards a two-state solution, that completely changes, because you're no longer saying, well, we want some sort of future Palestinian state as an entity, but we are completely open-minded about what shape that might take, what its borders might be, and that would have to be subject to negotiation with Israel. Instead, you're sort of flipping it around the other way and saying, right, well, the State of Palestine exists within the pre-1967 boundaries of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the onus is on Israel to get out of those territories and allow Palestine to resume its sovereignty in full. And if you then want to have negotiations about land swaps or whatever, that's fine, but that would have to be done on an equal basis. So it just completely changes the whole prism through which the push for a two-state solution is seen. It also means the UK government will have to change its language when it talks about the genocide or the conflict or whatever it wants to call it, but you can't say that Israel has a right to defend herself and then say that another sovereign nation that you recognise does not have the right to defend herself. If Israel moved militarily into certain parts of the State of Palestine, you would have to call that an invasion. You could no longer sort of flannel and say it was just ambiguous actions within disputed territories. It would be very clearly an invasion, and you would have to call it that. And if this is part of a snowball effect that France has played a part in, then it will accelerate that snowball effect, and it will make it much harder. Once Britain and France have recognised the State of Palestine, it will become a sort of domino effect, and presumably most countries within Western Europe will recognise Palestine. Maybe Germany won't because of their historic relationship with Israel. Maybe Italy won't because they've got a far-right government that's in hock to Donald Trump, but I think the majority of European countries will. And if you look at the map of countries that already recognise the State of Palestine, the vast majority of the world does recognise it. Almost every country in Africa, almost every country in South America and Central America, almost every country in Asia. The exclusions are basically the US, Canada, the majority of Western European countries, Australia and New Zealand. I would imagine now that Canada would probably recognise Palestine, Australia probably will, New Zealand probably will. And that would leave the holdouts as basically just the United States and a very small number of client nations, clients of the US. And that will make it very hard, for example, for any sort of Gaza resort plan that Donald Trump might put forward of, just clearing Gaza of its population and turning it into a resort to be run by America or by Israel or whatever. You can't do that when the vast majority of the countries of the world regard the Gaza Strip as a fundamental part, an integral part of the sovereign territory of the State of Palestine, belonging to the people of Palestine, who you just cannot ethnically cleanse and make them go away and use that land for your own purpose. So this is more than just symbolism. It does have concrete effects. And I would also just note in passing that this now means that in spite of the conditions that Keir Starmer has nominally laid down for the recognition of the State of Palestine, he now has a slightly more progressive stance on Palestine than Chris McEleny, who a few days ago said that Palestine should not be recognised as a state until Hamas have been totally defeated and rooted out, I think were the words he used, which I think that was quite revelatory. It sort of finally explained to me the sort of contradiction we've seen in Chris McElheny's position on the Gaza issue. He sometimes has condemned Israel, but then there was that bizarre incident a few weeks ago where he retweeted something that just basically mocked Greta Thunberg for caring about this issue. You're not allowed to care about this issue unless you first of all say things about Sudan and Ukraine and so on and so forth, which is a kind of very right-wing reactionary American position to hold. And I think, although I do not in any way approve of the Alba Party's purges of so many of its members, including Chris McElhenney, I of course have been a victim of that, I think you can see how it may be for the best that he's no longer in a leadership position within Alba, because it's just not consistent with the position they're trying to take, which is to be very strong on the Gaza issue and on Palestinian right. You just can't, it's just not consistent with that to say that there are conditions on Palestinian statehood. Hamas must be defeated first. I mean, the equivalent to that would be to say that we should stop recognising the sovereignty of Israel until Likud have been removed from power permanently and have been completely dismantled as an organisation, and all the other far-right parts of that governing coalition have got to go too, and you have to ban them first, and then we can maybe talk about Israeli sovereignty. We hear a lot about how it's anti-Semitic to hold Israel to higher standards than other countries, but in fact, what's happening is that Chris McElhenney and others, many, many others, are holding Israel to much lower standards than any other country in the world. And that's what's got to change. And that what is apparently starting to change, not through Keir Starmer's choice, but because he's been forced into it. So on that very positive note, I will leave you for this evening. But thank you for listening, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Bye for now.